I need to tell you something that happened to me. Something I've never been able to get out of my head, no matter how hard I try. And believe me, I've tried everything. Therapy, talking to friends, throwing myself into work, none of it helps. Because what I saw, what I felt during those weeks, isn't the kind of thing that simply fades away. I'm going to tell you everything, from the beginning to the end. And while I do, I want you to pay attention to every detail, because if you look up at the sky tonight, and the moon seems just a little bigger than you remember, maybe you'll understand what I went through. It started on a night when I couldn't sleep. Nothing unusual about that, I know. Everyone has nights like that. But this one felt different from the start. There was something in the air, a strange pressure, you know? Like the atmosphere had become too heavy, like the oxygen itself had thickened. I opened the window to breathe better, looked up at the sky, and saw the moon. And the moon was enormous. It wasn't a full moon, I'm absolutely sure of that. A few days earlier had been the full moon, the bright round one everyone notices. But that night, it was different, bigger than I had ever seen in my life. And I don't mean one of those beautiful, oversized moons near the horizon, the optical illusion everyone photographs. No, it was high in the sky, where the moon isn't supposed to look that large, and yet it still dominated a huge part of the horizon. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 minutes. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that my brain was distorting things. I closed the window, went back to bed, and eventually managed to fall asleep. The next morning, I barely even remembered it. Life goes on. But 2 days later, I looked up again, and it was even bigger. The first person I mentioned it to was a coworker. We were on break, I was drinking coffee, and I casually asked, "Have you noticed the moon looks strange lately?" He gave me that look people give when they don't want to engage with crazy talk, laughed a little, said he hadn't noticed anything, changed the subject. I let it go. But that night, I started researching. I spent hours online looking for some scientific explanation, some astronomical phenomenon, anything, and I found nothing. No news articles, no astronomers discussing it, no strange reports. To everyone else, apparently, the moon was perfectly normal. But it wasn't. I started taking pictures. Every night, around the same time, I opened the window and photographed the moon from the exact same angle, trying to keep the camera in the same position. And when I placed the photos side by side, there was no denying it. Day after day, it was growing. Not dramatically, not the kind of difference you'd notice overnight. It was subtle, but constant and real. The feeling it gave me is hard to describe accurately. It wasn't fear, it wasn't fascination. It was something in between, something visceral, like the moment an elevator suddenly stops and your stomach drops for a second. Except this feeling never went away. It stayed with me all day long, especially whenever I looked at the sky and thought, it's still up there, moving, getting closer. Because that was the conclusion I was reaching. The moon was approaching Earth. I stopped talking about it with people. I learned quickly that it was pointless. Every reaction was the same: awkward laughter, an uncomfortable silence, or concern about my mental state. And honestly, I understood. If someone had come to me with this story, I probably would have reacted the same way. But the photos didn't lie. 3 weeks after the first night, the moon was visibly larger than any moon I'd ever seen before. This wasn't imagination anymore. I had visual proof, day by day, photo by photo. And I began noticing other things too. The tides had changed. I live near the coast, and the ocean was reaching slightly farther onto the beach than before. Nothing catastrophic, no disasters, just different. People commented on it, but blamed the weather, the rain, the season. The animals were acting strange too. Dogs barked more at night. Birds that usually appeared in the mornings had disappeared completely. Even my own body felt wrong somehow. I slept badly, dreamed intensely, woke up in the middle of the night feeling that same pressure in the air that had started all of this. I knew I might be making connections that didn't exist, that maybe I was spiraling, seeing patterns where there were none. The human mind does that under stress. I know that. But the photos kept showing the same thing. And that part was objective. That part was real. I decided to go deeper. I started seriously studying astronomy. I spent weeks reading about lunar orbits, gravitational mechanics, the moon's movement around Earth. And I learned something interesting. Billions of years ago, the moon was much closer to Earth than it is today. Back then, tides were massive and days were shorter because Earth rotated faster. Over time, the moon drifted away from us, slowly, about 3 centimeters per year. 3 centimeters per year. That's what science says. But what if that process had reversed? What if, for some reason, because of some gravitational disturbance or some event our instruments hadn't detected yet, the moon's trajectory had changed? I know how insane that sounds. I know. But I kept researching anyway. I searched observatory databases, recent measurements of lunar distance, scientific records. And this is the part that disturbed me the most. I couldn't find updated data. Everything I found was old, months old, sometimes years old. Whenever I tried finding recent measurements, I hit dead ends. Websites offline, articles that wouldn't load, databases returning errors. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe I simply didn't know where to look, but that silence online unsettled me more than I expected. Then, 5 weeks after all this started, came the night I can never forget. I woke up around 2 in the morning. I don't know if a sound woke me or if I just opened my eyes naturally, but when I did, my room was illuminated. Not by hallway lights, not by electronics. A cold white glow was pouring through the cracks in my window blinds, far too bright to be normal moonlight. It looked more like a floodlight or car headlights, but it was perfectly still. I got out of bed slowly, walked to the window, and opened it. What I saw, I'll try to describe it, but words don't really work. The moon was so large it no longer felt like part of the sky. It was as if the sky itself had been replaced. It occupied nearly a third of everything I could see. Impossibly detailed, impossibly close. I could see the craters clearly, the shadows along the edges, the outlines of rocky formations. It was too detailed, too close, too real. And outside, everything was completely silent. No cars, no barking dogs, no wind. It was the kind of silence you only experience in places completely isolated from civilization. Except, I was in the middle of a city. I stood there staring at it, and what I felt wasn't awe, it wasn't beauty. It was primal terror, the kind of fear that bypasses logic and goes straight into your body. My heart pounded, my breathing shortened. Every instinct I had screamed one simple thing. This is wrong. This should not be here. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 minutes? An hour? Time felt different that night. Then, slowly, I became overwhelmingly tired. Heavy, sudden exhaustion, like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. I barely made it back to bed before collapsing into sleep. When I woke, it was daytime. Bright sun, traffic outside, someone nearby making coffee, everything completely ordinary. I rushed to the window. The sky was blue and empty, and the moon, faintly visible in daylight like it sometimes is, looked completely normal again. Small, pale, distant, exactly the way it always had. I grabbed my phone and checked the photos I'd taken over those weeks. They were all there, every single one, showing the moon slowly growing larger day after day, except for the last photo, the one from the previous night. It was gone. I know I took it. I vividly remember lifting my phone, aiming at the sky, pressing the button. But the picture didn't exist, not even in the deleted folder. I spent the rest of the day trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe I experienced some kind of hypnagogic hallucination, those vivid visions people can have between sleep and wakefulness. That's documented. It happens. But the earlier photos still existed, and the moon had returned to normal size, completely normal. And it stayed that way. I never saw that terrifying closeness again, never heard that impossible silence again, never woke up to that cold white light again. And somehow, that's the part that disturbs me most, because there are only two possibilities. Either I experienced some kind of psychological episode that culminated in an incredibly vivid hallucination and then disappeared without leaving any other symptoms. Or what I saw was real. And if it was real, then something approached Earth and then left. And if something really did come closer before retreating again, why? What was it doing? Was it observing us? Testing something? Or did it simply pass by indifferent to humanity, on its way to somewhere I can't even imagine? I don't have answers. That's the truth. I've learned there are things that happen which don't fit into any framework we have available. The human mind is built to create meaning, to form narratives, to recognize patterns. That's how we survive. But sometimes what you encounter doesn't fit into words. What I know is this. For 5 weeks, I witnessed something that should have been impossible. I documented part of it in photographs. I physically felt the effects of an approach that has no simple scientific explanation. And one night, I looked up at the sky and saw something far too large to be real. And then it went away. I think about it every time I look at the moon now. Every time I see it hanging there peacefully, small and distant, I wonder if it was always like this, if what happened was real, and if it was, whether it'll happen again. Tonight, before you go to sleep, maybe you'll look up at the sky too, and the moon will probably look normal, small, distant, exactly where it's supposed to be. But pay attention, because sometimes the things that should terrify us most are the things that arrive so slowly we don't notice until it's too late.